All right, hello and welcome to episode number 12, so team number 20 on my NHL deep dive series. And first of all, welcome to the dorm. This is the background you're gonna have to get used to for a little bit. I might move some stuff around because I have my monitor here and I have my camera over here, and I don't have a mic stand anymore. It broke, so I just have to hold it basically, which is kind of awkward, but we're just gonna deal with it. So yeah, it's kind of a makeshift setup right now, but we're working on it. We're gonna try to get it to a better um, situation eventually. But for now, this is what we're dealing with. Anyway, let's move into why we're actually here, and that's to talk about the St. Louis Blues today. So, looking at the Blues offseason moves, first of all, it was a really it was a fairly quiet offseason up until the offer sheets. Um, and it was, they had Alex Texier, they had Radek Faxa, they had the Joseph brothers, um, Matthew on offense, Pio on defense. And of course the Dylan Holloway thing, which we'll get into in a second. Defensively, it's P.O. Joseph and Ryan Suter, and in net they didn't change much. They lose Sammy Blais and Kevin Hayes on forward. Obviously, they trade um, Kevin Hayes out to clear cap space. They lose Marco Scandella, which isn't really that big of a deal, and they lose Torey Krug to injury, which is kind of the big thing hurting this blue line. Uh, and of course, the offer sheets to Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway. First of all, offensively, I think this team got slightly better. Losing Kevin Hayes kind of sucks because he's a very solid center still, but his cap hit just wasn't worth it. And Sammy Blais is just kind of a guy. I think they make up for losing Kevin Hayes in the just sheer amount of like decent players they get. I mean, Radek Faxa is fine. Alex Texier is just kind of a guy, but Matthew Joseph's a solid bottom sixer, and Dylan Holloway I think will fit into their kind of top nine, hopefully top six, very well. Um, so I think sheer volume wise, they kind of replaced Kevin Hayes' production, who wasn't like anything outstanding, but he was definitely like the best player of that group going into this season, at least. Dylan Holloway obviously is kind of the biggest question mark. He could explode out this season and have a great year. And I think a lot of people expected him to in Edmonton. We'll see if that app translates over to St. Louis. Defensively is where this team is interesting because I actually think, P.O. Joseph, Ryan Suter, and Philip Broberg for Marco Scandella is obviously an upgrade. The reason why I have them slightly downgraded is because of the Torey Krug situation. I think you look at Ryan Suter being, a bottom pair defenseman. That's kind of what he is at this point. P.O. Joseph's a bottom pair defenseman at this point. Philip Broberg is a big question mark, although he hasn't really played yet. So it's hard to consider him an upgrade because we haven't seen him play a ton in the NHL, at least from a regular season perspective. He had a pretty good playoff run with the Oilers, but that's really not like a large enough sample size for me to attach him to being like this superstar top four defenseman. So Torey Krug is the big loss, and they didn't replace him with anybody who's proven they can be that Torey Krug replacement yet. Again, Philip Broberg very much could become that, but he just hasn't proven that yet. Therefore, I have the group as slightly downgraded, but I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. I think they did the best they could, and I feel like Philip Broberg's a good enough pickup that he might be able to kind of make something happen here. And obviously, they didn't do anything in net. We'll talk about the goaltending tandem because I actually like the goaltending tandem the way it is. But first of all, let's move into this forward core, who I've ranked 13th in the NHL, and it's led by kind of their big three. And I think all three of these guys are very much underrated in the NHL right now, just because it's the St. Louis Blues and they don't get a ton of media attention. And for the concerns I have with this team, and there's not a whole lot, honestly, up front. I think this team forward wise is actually quite good. The strength is definitely these top three, and Robert Thomas is where we need to start, who finally hit that point a game threshold. I think it was 26 goals, 86 points for Robert Thomas this year in a full season. He really became like a bona fide like top tier NHL center this season. And if I had to rank everybody in the A tier for centers or for players, Robert Thomas is probably at the lower end of that A tier, but I think he did enough this season to prove that he's like in that second tier of the NHL right now. Now I think that there's a chance that he could bump himself down to an A minus, even with a very strong season. But based on what he did last season, his underlying numbers were fantastic. His points were there. He really was able to step into that number one center spot fully and be like prove that he is the guy here now. And I think that was enough for me to give him an A. And like I said, I think it's a low A, but he's still in that tier of centers at this point, especially with the guys that are in that group at the moment. Jordan Kyrou, again, just another guy who's just super underrated. I feel like nobody really talks about Jordan Kyrou being one of the most electric wingers in the NHL. And his puck managing ability is fantastic. His transition ability is great. He has the speed. His footwork's there. His puck handling is fantastic. His defensive game's taken a couple steps up too. He again just really developing into that ideal number one winger, and especially with the fluctuation of wingers on this team outside of these guys, I think it's very important to have that kind of on lock. And Jordan Kyrou and Robert Thomas obviously have become one of the best duos in the NHL and are kind of the catalyst for the St. Louis Blues offense. Pavel Buchnevich is the other guy in kind of this big three. And again, and somebody who just kind of gets forgotten about, right? Like he was involved in a massively lopsided trade with the Rangers a couple years ago. And he's really just come into his own as soon as he left New York. And he was also a very good player there. And a lot of the analytics community loved him as a Ranger. But now you're starting to see the points start to come with it. You're starting to see a lot more attention come to him because of his defensive game and his two-way ability, I guess. He's really starting to get that recognition that the kind of the numbers people were giving him in New York. Now he's starting to get in St. Louis because he's been given that bigger role. And I think just the amount of how lopsided that trade was to begin with has also helped um, shed some light on just how good of a player Pavel Buchnevich is. Besides that, this top six is very interesting because Jake Neighbors is somebody that I'm still very intrigued by. I have him as a C right now. I don't know if we see a big step up from Jake Neighbors, but I think he's fine in what he's going to be asked to do, especially playing with Thomas and Kyrie on that top line and the way Daily Faceoff has it right now. I think that's a solid enough like complementary player. I think he fits that line very well. Um, Obviously we have Brandon Saad, who as a second line winger is a very solid option, and he's proven that he can be kind of a plug and play kind of guy. He's been that basically his whole career, and I think he very much fits the identity of what the St. Louis Blues team is trying to do. And then Dylan Holloway, who is again just kind of one of those question marks, right? Like the Blues went out, made this offer sheet for him, and I think it was a very good, reasonable cap hit for his offer sheet. I actually liked it like from like a team building perspective, a lot more than the Broberg one, even though I think Broberg might have more boom potential. The thing I worry about with Holloway is that he found out the success playing with a guy like Leon Draisaitl, who's a super dynamic, like elite playmaker. I don't know if St. Louis has that guy. I think I'd almost rather see him play with Thomas and Kyrou because it might open the ice up a bit more for him than like Saad and Buchnevich would. I think that the play driving ability on that second line, on either line, really is very good. So I think that will help him. But I don't know if we see the same kind of breakout we expected from Holloway playing with Leon Draisaitl that we would with like a Pavel Buchnevich, for instance, because he just doesn't have that game breaking ability that a Leon Draisaitl does. But I still think we see a very solid season from Dylan Holloway. I think his play style actually really fits what the Blues are trying to do here. And overall, as a top six, I mean, like I really like it. I think everybody very much has that similar identity as a player on this team, where they're very much like puck controllers. They're going to kind of be able to hit you in transition. They're going to be able to break into the offensive zone very consistently. They're going to be a very strong forward checking team. It's going to be very much the St. Louis Blues we've seen under Craig Berube, maybe just at a different level because of the coaching change. Maybe that helps spark something in the way this team plays, but I don't think identity wise, this team's going to change a whole lot from what they've been because all their players basically fit the same system. I think they've done a very good job putting that together. Um, as for a depth role, I just realized I have Jake Neighbors on here twice. I don't know who's supposed to be there. I will have to figure that out. Um, Let me see who is actually supposed to be there. I'm losing my mind right now. Anyway, this bottom six, well, I looked that up. Brayden Schenn and Alex Texier. Alexander Texier is just kind of a guy. I'm not really um too concerned about that. I really like um I really like Brayden Schenn. I think he's a good kind of depth option for this team. let's go with Oscar Sundquist uh on that other line. That's what we're gonna do. We're gonna go Oscar Sundquist there. Just because he's the next highest rated player. So he's a D. Oscar Sundquist is a D. I apologize for this. I'm not redoing the video. This is just the way it's gonna be. Uh, so that actually does move the Blues down to 14th instead of 13th. So just um for your own personal record, it doesn't move where they be in the overall rankings, but they'd be the 14th best offense now because Jake Neighbors isn't going to play twice. Anyway, Oscar Sundquist, Braden Shen. I still have notes on Oscar Sundquist for some reason. Um, yeah, I mean, like Sundquist is your kind of your typical kind of like power forward player. He's going to be grinding in the corners, battling for pucks. Same with I think again it very much fits kind of the full picture of what this team's going to try to be. Same with like a Braden Shen, right? Texie is just a player. He's a plug and play player. I actually like their third line better, or their fourth line better than their third line. With Joseph, Radek Faksa, and Kasperi Kapanen. And Kasperi Kapanen is kind of an interesting one because again, that's somebody who could just pop off for 25 goals and be a very good secondary scorer kind of player, right? Like it's just he could get hot for a month or two, go on a crazy streak, and all of a sudden you're looking back at the season, you're like, wow, Kasperi Kapanen had 50 points this season. I don't see that as a non-factor, right? So depth wise, like I also really like where this St. Louis Blues team is at the moment. And that's weird because a couple years ago I didn't like kind of the direction of this team. Everybody I think was overhyping them a little bit. And I don't think we're kind of there anymore. I think that the Blues have kind of become an underrated team almost. And I only have them at 20, but just based on what this team is, I mean, like, yeah, Kapanen had 22 points in 73 games last year, but I could see a world where he kind of, all of a sudden somebody gets hurt, he kind of gets slid up into the top six for a couple weeks. Maybe he gets hot, right? Like that's somebody that all of a sudden could just pop off for like 15, 20 goals. 50 points might be a little outrageous, but that's kind of what this bottom six strikes me as, right? Like Braden Shen's a similar kind of player. Matthew Joseph, again, somebody who's had moments of looking like a very competent, like even middle six forward. That's kind of what the Blues have done this offseason. And they throw that all together. And it's created this group that I think is very well rounded. And I think is better than looking at them as individuals, right? Like even if the ratings aren't quite there, right? Like a Jake Neighbors, for instance, is somebody who um I look at and like, yeah, he's only a C, but he fits what this team's trying to do really well. And so yeah, he's a C, but he actually like he might fit this team in the same way that like a B player would or a B minus player would, right? So it's like I think they've done a very good job putting together players who really fit the scheme of what this team's trying to do. And that is almost more important than just acquiring talent, right? It's acquiring the right talent. And you might take a step down like ratings wise, but it's going to help you in the long run if everybody kind of fits the same mold. And offensively, like everybody in that forward core fits that St. Louis Blues mold. And I think that's a very effective place to start, especially for a team that kind of went through a bit of a retool the last couple of years. Looking defensively at this team, I have them ranked 25th in the NHL, and a lot of that is due to the Torey Krug injury. And this blue line is very good on one side of the ice, and they're hoping that Philip Broberg can be kind of a catalyst for that other side, basically. Um, Colton Parayko and Justin Faulk are kind of the two anchors on this blue line now, and obviously Nick Leddy was going to be the other one. Colton Parayko is interesting because he's somebody who 3 years ago was looked at as somebody who's going to become a top 20 defenseman, maybe a top 15 defenseman, and then injuries kind of sidelined him for a little bit, and he really hasn't found that same level that he was at a couple years ago. Maybe given the opportunity, if he's fully healthy and given kind of that number one defenseman role because Torey Krug's out, we might see Colton Parayko kind of hit that bounce back that we've been waiting for. And I really hope so because I think a solid Colton Parayko is like was one of my favorite defensemen a couple years ago. So I hope we get to see that bounce back from him. Justin Falk is another interesting one. I think he's very much a utility type player, but he still has enough talent to be considered like a B level defenseman. But he's somebody you might have to shelter a bit more. Um, I mean, other than that, I still like Ryan Suter for what he is. I like him as like a third pair defenseman. I actually think if he does end up playing with Philip Broberg, at least to start, that makes a lot of sense because you can kind of ease Broberg into this system a little bit. And eventually maybe you move Broberg up to play with a Parenko and then you slide Letty down. And then like that's kind of what I see. Everybody else on this blue line is just kind of like guys. P.O. Joseph is also in the mix to kind of split time with like half the guys on this blue line. So for St. Louis, they kind of went out and they acquired a lot of quantity this summer, especially bringing in P.O. Joseph. Um, I think that's kind of what I look at this point is that they have guys who they can just plug into this lineup, see who clicks, and then go from there. And especially with the Torrey Krug injury, which I do think sets them back quite a bit. He was also rated a B, by the way. It does open up the opportunity for somebody to battle for a spot, right? And Broberg's going to get a lot of opportunities to battle for a spot. Paranovich is going to get a lot of opportunities to battle for a spot. And then Letty and Suter, I think, are kind of your odd guys out who will be bouncing in and out of the lineup more than anybody else, along with P.O. Joseph. And I think but again, ratings wise, it doesn't look like a great blue line, but I think everybody kind of fits the way they want to run this team decently enough, right? Like, do I think they could find a better version of Nick Letty out there? Yeah, probably. Um, Phil Broberg obviously is a huge question mark. He's a D minus because he just hasn't played a whole lot in the regular season at least, and we all know what overrating a player because of a couple good playoff series can do without like a larger body of work. So there's still questions here. I'm really intrigued to see what Philip Broberg does because he'll get a ton of opportunity on this blue line, especially based on how wide open it is outside of Parenko. Really being the only guy that you can just kind of throw out there a bunch. There's going to be plenty of opportunity in St. Louis, and for a team that I don't see pushing, like I think they'll be in that playoff bubble in the West, but I don't think that they're good enough to like really compete. Um, they'll have the opportunity to try players out in different roles and see what clicks. And then maybe, we go into next season talking about the Blues, really pushing for a playoff spot in that Central Division, which is going to be crazy next season if everybody continues to develop the way they are. So I think there's a bit of flexibility. I really like the forward core. The defense, I think, has less opportunity for like boom potential. I think Parenko is one, Broberg's the other, and everybody else Prinovic again could be somebody who maybe slides up a little bit, but other than that, you kind of know what you're getting with these guys, which is fine. Like I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And yeah, I'm really intrigued to see how this team decides to utilize Broberg because it seemed like the Oilers were pretty dead set on him being like a full-time top six player, or top four defenseman rather in their system. So we'll see. I mean, there's going to be plenty of opportunity. It depends on how much they want to trust him. Moving into the goalies, I really like this group. They're my third highest ranked goalie tandem, and people love to hate on Jordan Binnington, and I get it. I've done it too, but let's be honest here. There's maybe 10 goalies that you look at in the NHL, and you think, yeah, that's somebody that I could fully trust as like a full-time starting goalie. And those 8 to 10 goalies are in my top two tiers, right? Like Jordan Binnington's in that next group, and it's hard to fully explain until like the full like rankings are out. But the A minus tier for me is mostly guys who like you can trust most nights. And Jordan Binnington's kind of been that kind of goalie the last couple of years. And I get that like the attitude thing is something that people love to hate on, and people don't like how outspoken he is and obnoxious he can be on the ice. And I get that. I mean, I understand that to some extent. But you also need to just understand how good of a goalie he's been over the last 2 seasons. I mean, you're talking about a guy who is sitting 15th in goals saved above expected over the last 2 years, playing significantly more games than everybody else. He's tied for the second most games played over those 2 years with Ilya Sorokin. That's a really solid goalie to be that high in goals saved above expected. You look at last year, he was second in the league, right? And he played 57 games. It's really a masterclass. It's been like last year was a phenomenal season for you. He played the sixth most games in the NHL. He finished second in goals saved above expected. He is somebody who I think should have gotten some more Vezina conversations. But again, you miss the playoffs. You've on a team that's in a small market. You're not going to get that kind of attention. But especially based on that season, it was a super consistent season for him last year. The year before that was not as good, but it was still fine. I think if Jordan Binnington needs to have one more of these like top 5, 6 goalie in the league years, and then I'll really start to believe that he's like in that top like 2 tier kind of goaltender. But based on last year, I mean, like second in the league in goals saved above expected, 6th most game played. That's a 3rd tier goal in the NHL. I don't know if there's much of an argument against that, to be honest, at this point. And Joel Hofer had again just a very solid backup season last year. He looked very confident as a backup goaltender. I can't put him higher than a C plus just because he is a true backup goalie at this point. But that's another guy who maybe we see another step from Hofer. Maybe he's able to take more of that load off of Binnington, and he's able to play even close to like 35 games this season. If you can get that and you can give Binnington kind of more rest and less of these like crazy taxing games, then maybe that does help them push into a playoff, right? Like that's the big thing for me with this team, right? Like defensively, there's so many questions and there's so many moving parts on that blue line. And they really don't have like any true like defensive defensemen either. If the goaltending can help mitigate a lot of those concerns, it really does open up this team's potential quite a bit. And the forward core's gonna be good enough. They're gonna be able to drive play. They're gonna be able to score goals. It's mostly just can Binnington and Hofer find consistency to the same level that they had last season? And can the blue line patch up the holes enough to push them into a playoff spot? I don't think the answer is a definite no. I definitely don't think the answer is a definite yes, but there's enough here for me to look back at the end of the season if the Blues make the playoffs and be like, yeah, that's why, right? Jordan Binnington had another very strong season. He's in the Vezina conversation. Broberg stepped up, looked really good. Colton Parayko was healthy and looked like the Colton Parayko we thought he was going to be, 2 years ago. And the forward core kind of found a good place for Dylan Holloway to fit, and everybody else was able to kind of step up a little bit and improve their game slightly. This team makes the playoffs. If even a couple of those things don't happen, I think the West is just too jammed up at the middle of the division or the middle of the conference to see the Blues make it in. But we're getting into that tier now where basically everybody I talk about at this point is going to be in that playoff conversation. And I think the Blues definitely deserve to be in that conversation for sure. And especially with this goaltending tandem, especially with that forward core, it's going to be about the blue line. That's the biggest thing for me with this team is it's just going to be about the blue line. And if they can figure it out, then good for them. And I think they'll get in. But if not, it could be not necessarily a long year in St. Louis because I think they'll still be in that wild card race situation, but maybe they won't be as close to a playoff spot as some of their fans would hope at this point. But a team that really didn't rebuild anything, they just kind of went through a bit of a retool over the last couple of years, let some guys develop, and I don't hate it. I don't hate where this team's at right now. Do I think it might, long term turn into a Stanley Cup? Maybe not, but for what they tried to do, I think they did a decent job putting this group together and kind of turning this ship from a team that was kind of stuck in forever mediocrity to now having a pretty decent outlook over the next 3 or 4 years. So that's it. That's the St. Louis Blues, and uh, things kind of got messy with the Jake Neighbors situation there at the beginning, but we got through it, I think. Again, I just moved in like yesterday. I just wanted to get something out because it's been a while. So I apologize, but hopefully the setup will be better even tomorrow. I hope to have another episode out because we basically have to go every day now. We got 19 more of these to go, and I got just over 30 days to do it. So season starts October 4th. We will have everything out before then. That's the plan. We have a couple more special guests lined up as well, one later for this week. So stay tuned for that. And yeah, thank you for watching and like the video if you liked it. Let me know what you think of St. Louis Blues in the comments down below. I think their ceiling is kind of low, but I like the way the team looks. I think overall it's an exciting roster and it's going to be fun, especially with the two offer sheets that went through, adding some excitement to the August lull of the NHL. Yeah, thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.